And because he's a polite, decent man, when I pressed you, you finally said, I guess I thought it was the Jews. Why? People who are former Christians are embarrassed by this.
Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from. Whoop.
Carolina, hope you guys are doing well.
Hey, Rev Robbins, how are you? What's the question for Rabbi?
Fantastic. Rabbi, my question is about the Passion of Christ. So I guess what I'm confused about is I was always taught as a Christian that it wasn't Pontius Pilate that was the bad guy. He was, I guess, manipulated in the Christian version by I think his name was Cephas, and it confused me. Like who's actually responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus? Was it the Jews or was it Roman?
You were a pastor, right?
Yes.
You were a pastor. Talk to me.
Yes.
You've read the Gospels. Let's just talk. Let's talk this through together. Stay with me. This is not a setup. You were a pastor. You must have read the Gospels. You must have read the Passion narratives. All right. Well, when you read the Passion, I will not be offended, okay? But this is, I think, really important because you spent a lot of time not only being a Christian, but a Christian leader. So tell me, no offense, when you were in the church and you read the Gospels, and specifically the Passion narratives, who did you think was responsible essentially for Jesus' crucifixion? The truth. Go ahead. Do it for me. Just do it. I love you, brother. It's all good.
Okay.
Give it to me straight, because I think the viewers need to know this so that I'm not setting this up. Tell me, you, in your Christian world, when you read the Gospels, who did you think was really responsible, who was culpable for killing Christ?
The Jews.
Yeah,
and
Jews.
I was always taught and understood that, that Rome, that he didn't want, that he washed his hands of the situation and didn't want to do it.
Right.
But, that just...
Right. Thank you.
I didn't want to sound bad by saying
it is very important for everyone to know. My dear brother, I really, Reverend, thank you so much for calling in, really. And I appreciate it. It's all good because I need the viewers to know that I'm not making this up because I have an unfavorable view of Christianity. And it's very important for the Jewish people listening to know that I'm not saying this because I don't think that Christianity is a valid religion. No, this is standard fare, and you'd have to be crazy not to think that way. Thank you, Reverend. I really appreciate it. We did this before. In all the Gospels, the Jews are completely culpable for killing Jesus, and Pontius Pilate is exonerated. And I'll go further. The later the book, chronologically, the more the Jews are held accountable and the more Rome is exonerated. And I illustrate this in Volume 1 of Let's Get Biblical. And I start with Mark, the earliest of the four Gospels, the earliest surviving of the Gospels, where the Jews are definitely responsible, definitely culpable. And then as you move on to Matthew, as you said, we have the scene in Matthew 27, our Passion narrative, where Pontius Pilate says, I see this man as completely innocent. Pontius Pilate's wife, she makes a cameo in the book of Matthew, no other gospel. And she had a dream about him the night before. She knows Jesus is innocent. Imagine the scene in Matthew where Pontius Pilate and his wife are there screaming that Jesus is innocent of all this. This is an innocent man. And the hordes of Jews, imagine how this plays out in the movie. The hordes of Jews are screaming, crucify him. We take his blood upon ourselves and our children. Not only take upon ourselves, but all future generations. This is unique to Matthew. It's Matthew 27:25. Christian anti-Semites are not crazy. They are reading their Bible literally, a plain, natural reading. You'd have to say the Jews are uniquely responsible, and not only Jews of that generation, but all future generations. In the book of John, Pontius Pilate is having a very lucid conversation with Jesus. By the time we get to John, we're not looking at a Jesus that's mild and quiet and doesn't understand what's happening. By the time we get to John, the passion narrative has expanded. Jesus is very much in control of the situation around him. In John, and only John, Jesus is carrying his own cross. Doesn't need anybody else to carry the cross for him. And he's having a very lucid conversation with Pontius Pilate, and he says, "You have no authority over me," in John chapter 19, verse 11. And in fact, those who gave me over to you, it's their sin that is greatest. And if you look carefully at the text, once Pontius Pilate realizes that the Christ-killing hordes of screaming, angry Jews, he just can't control them. Somehow Pontius Pilate can't control them, which differs sharply from the Pontius Pilate we know of from historians. When Christians read these texts in the Passion narratives, they are very reasonably concluding that the Jews are completely responsible for this. And that's why Christians do not express any anger or rage at Rome at all. It's all focused on the Jews. And these Christians that detest Jews, they actually are reading the texts literally and correctly. And even in the earliest surviving piece of Christian literature, it's a letter of Paul, 1 Thessalonians 2, 14 through 16. This is the only letter in the Christian canon that may have been written in the 40s. 1 Thessalonians could very well have been written, let's say, 49. But there's nothing older than that surviving, right? Nothing older than that. Paul says the Jews are responsible for this and are contrary to mankind for this. I'm not like setting up a straw man because I want to characterize Christianity in a way that's unfavorable. This is the content. Any reasonable person, I'm not asking you to do this because I don't want to manufacture more anti-Semites. And I think, thankfully, many Christians don't read their Christian Bible very well. But any reasonable person who opens up John chapter 18 and 19, just take your time. It's well written. Right? If you read those chapters, you're going to conclude that the Jews did it. If you sit down and just read, just right after the Olivet Discourse, so just Matthew 25, let's say 26, read Matthew 27. I'm not saying to do it, but if you're not sure if I am accurately characterizing how the New Testament portrays the Jews, the wickedness of the Jews, just read Matthew chapter 27. And you'll see it. And you could read 28 too. And what the cover-up. It's a nightmare. So that's the answer. The answer is I had a nice man on just now who's an ex-Christian, who's an ex-reverend. And because he's a polite, decent man, when I pressed you, you finally said, I guess I thought it was the Jews. Why? People who are former Christians are embarrassed by this. I need my viewers to know this is not the ranting of an anti-Christian rabbi. I am accurately portraying what's there. And again, I return back to this point that I made earlier. Why is it that Christians claim that the suffering of the Jews demonstrates the wrongfulness of Judaism, but the suffering and death of the disciples demonstrates the truthfulness of Christianity? Think about that. Thank you very much for calling in.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא ועת נעשה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה